Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
CityCast Pittsburgh is supported by Fulton Commons. If you're looking for a gorgeous co-working space with lots of light and some truly wonderfully funky decor, check out Fulton Commons on the north side. The historic but very well renovated old school building is deep in the neighborhood by a park, tucked away but still super close to anywhere you want to be. They've got offices and common spaces. It's perfect for organizations or individuals, and they even have a shared food production kitchen on site. So there's lots of food-related events for their members. If this sounds like your dream co-working space, visit fultonpgh.org to request a tour. Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, 38 states have legalized some form of cannabis, including Pennsylvania. But we are one of the only states in our part of the world to stop short of recreational. Could this be the year? We are with a couple of Capitol watchers to talk about what's held Pennsylvania back, how full legalization could maybe affect our medical program, how the sales system could even work, and their predictions for 2025. It's Monday, January 27th. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh is talking about. I'm with Ed Mahan and Stephen Caruso, both reporters for Spotlight PA, and I'm so excited to have y'all because this month marks CityCast's 3rd anniversary. Woo woo! We have been around.
That's exciting. I'm honored.
A while now, but we've also been doing this exact conversation for 3 straight years. Is Pennsylvania going to legalize cannabis this year? And Ed, is it going to happen? Is it going to happen this time?
I guess my answer will be the same as the other 3 years. Maybe. I feel like unlike past years, I'm running out of other states that can legalize it around us. The only one left to join the legalization club is West Virginia.
I know. And Pennsylvania likes to make West Virginia the butt of our jokes, which is not fair or appropriate ever. But it's like they're the only ones left with us. Stephen, maybe you know, I feel like people in my circles are suddenly wildly confident that this is the year. And I don't understand why. Like, why is it suddenly from an aspiration to like a no, it's a certainty, it's going to happen? Like, what's changed?
Well, you should never be wildly confident about anything happening in Harrisburg. I think I have tried to dissuade myself from ever being confident about them doing anything since like maybe 2020. But with that said, I mean, things take a couple years of being talked about to kind of marinate in lawmakers' minds to actually get done. Marijuana is certainly one of those topics. Like the first serious legalization bill, I think, came out like 2019, 2020-ish. Like, like bipartisan is what I'm using for serious. Like now the House is Democratic. Josh Spear has called for it specifically in a budget address.
That was last year, yeah.
Yeah, and, I bet you he asked for it again. I have no inside sourcing. I'm just saying that's my assumption. And the other thing, too, is the almighty dollar. I think that the state is going to need some new revenues soon. That's the chatter I hear, is that folks are actually kind of worried about the state's finances going into 2025. With that as an incentive, it really gets everyone kind of in line to push past their disagreements on how to do it, to maybe get to just let's actually do this.
Yeah, I mean, those are some of the arguments for, I guess. Why are people still against it? I guess I'm especially curious about opposition when, as you said, Ed, everyone else around us has now gotten this done.
I think in the Republican Senate, which has a lot of power, just the idea that it's illegal at the federal level, and that's sort of a non-starter. Because
if the feds hate it, we got to hate it too.
We got to hate it too. And like that there's going to be too complicated to to go about doing it that way.
But Pennsylvania loves to be complicated. Look how we did our alcohol system.
Exactly,
Like
yeah.
the Liquor Control Board is bizarre, and we thrive on that.
That's
but if
true.
I may, I mean, that system was set up right after Prohibition when alcohol went from illegal to legal, and then we set it up to make it really hard.
I mean, is that what we anticipate could happen? Like, assuming some action happens, like in recreational cannabis does become legal, do we anticipate having some cannabis equivalent of fine wine and good spirits on our corners?
Well, if I may, I mean, that is at least what one state lawmaker has proposed. Representative Dan Frankel, Pittsburgh zone, representing the Squirrel Hill. That's what his pitch was, is he wants the state stores or state store system to be selling marijuana. I should point out that no other state has successfully made that work. I think New Hampshire came the closest, and then they ran into some legal issues, especially as we are right now, where it is technically you have a state selling something that's illegal federally, which can create some problems of federalism. But, I mean, with that said, that's definitely been one push. It's backed by a powerful union, UFCW. I think some of the public health folks are kind of a little behind that with the thought of having the state as a gatekeeper. I mean, the other option is allowing the active medical marijuana companies to kind of step into the market. A lot of them sell recreationally. There might be a middle option in between, but that's kind of what the fight really is over. Have the state sell it potentially with its pitfalls, or have, those companies sell it already, who are already in the state.
Yeah, and I'll just jump into that seems like if those are the two choices, there's the third camp that wouldn't want to legalize it at all. And then if you have two camps, one is state store versus a more private system, it seems like you are potentially decreasing the odds of it passing if those two things are competing with each other, because then you have the third camp who's happy to not legalize it at all.
I mean, how big is that third camp? Like, I'm thinking of that poll that y'all reported on last year that found the majority of Pennsylvanians actually want that. Not to say that our legislature does what their full constituency is in favor of, but it does suggest that perhaps there's a critical mass behind this.
I mean, go back, you brought this idea of like who opposes it. Look, the State Police Chiefs Association opposes it. They have concerns about unintended consequences from allowing another drug to become legal. That, what does that mean for public health? I know like child advocates are worried about it. I think industrial groups that employ a lot of people, whether it be the Manufacturers Association, the Truckers Association, they're concerned about it. They don't want people high on the job. I think one of the biggest concerns is just that, like, how do you test if someone's high? I mean, we have lots of jokes about this with the red eyes and whatnot, but marijuana stays in the body for a very long time. And a lot of the tests that we have to look for, like THC, for instance, like might have a positive result, even if you're no longer, under the active influence. So I think there's just this like time element concern of like, we want to be sure that if something goes wrong and somebody is under the influence of marijuana, we can hold them accountable for it. But if we don't have a good way to test for it, then we're concerned. Of course, none of that gets in the way of the fact that plenty of people probably go to work high right now when it's illegal. But, like that, I think there's just this concern of the government just opening up the floodgates to anybody doing it, not just the people who go out of state, go to an illicit dealer, what have you, to get it right now.
I mean, I guess that all tracks, but it all sounds like arguments from like 8 years ago. Like plenty of other states have figured out ways around this. I guess I'm curious what's held Pennsylvania back so much.
I mean, when you say that other states have found ways around that, I mean, I think that's,
no one's going through it because we still have the federal government like smacking the way.
Yeah. I mean, I think, the public health concerns, how well those states have addressed them, or whether they've just legalized it and allowed the consequences to happen. And when we talk about consequences, they are different than other drugs. And there's no reported deaths from an overdose of marijuana, for instance. So, all conversations about marijuana tend to have that acknowledgement that the risks to this drug, even when used inappropriately or abused, are relatively minor. That's something a doctor told me very recently. But there are potential negative health consequences. And so there's a question of whether those states have just, legalized it without fully grappling with those public health consequences. But I mean, we have a Republican Senate, and up until recently, the Democrats had they still have a very small majority. So, I mean, it's tough to get it through this legislature. And also, we don't have voter referendums in the same way that other states do.
I think that's probably one of the big ones. Like other states can, like the populace, the people can bring something to their own ballots. And here in Pennsylvania, we've talked about that on this show before, but it is wildly complicated to nearly to the point of impossible.
Yeah, like you can't use it to go around the legislature in the way that those other states can.
The legislature has to let us do it multiple times over multiple sessions. It's not about what the people want in that case.
Mm-hmm. in terms of the state store system, I mean, Karen O'Keefe, she's of the Marijuana Policy Project. She sent me several concerns about legalization through that state store system. One is that it's unlikely to get off the ground because of the feds. One is that if cannabis was sold from existing liquor stores, it would force people with drinking problems to be exposed to alcohol to get cannabis. And again, this is the Marijuana Policy Project, which supports legalization. Or maybe the sole customer for a new cannabis grower processors would also be their regulator. So you'd have the state system selling it while also the regulator. I mean, she brought up the fact that existing medical cannabis businesses would likely go out of business because once you introduced recreational marijuana, medical programs tend to see sharp declines in enrollment. There's a couple theories about why that happens. I mean, one simple explanation is people just would rather treat it like an over-the-counter medication and just not have to go through the doctor process. There are other explanations as well, but just the general sense is that medical programs do see a decline.
So what's y'all's prediction then? It sounds like you're a lot more tempered than how folks are talking about it on this side of the state all the time. If the legislature were to attempt something like this, if the governor does back it again, do you have an expectation as to when we might hear something?
Look, I think that a lot of debates in Harrisburg are settled come budget season. We'll all be looking, I think, come May, June. Like, obviously, also the governor has to give a budget address. We have to see if he resupports it. But yeah, I'd be looking at June. This could maybe become a fall thing, but frankly, lawmakers have gotten really bad at passing anything outside of the budget time. And as Ed noted, like, the fact is it really falls upon people who are pro-legalization settling on their framework. They don't have a settled framework right now. This debate between estate stores and broadly what I think that represents is a more restrictive way of selling marijuana versus a more free market way of selling marijuana, championed by the companies who are currently involved in the medical marijuana program in Pennsylvania. Those two sides of we should legalize weed need to come to a consensus, and so far they have not.
Yeah. And I'll just jump in. I don't really make predictions, but I do prepare. And I guess what I am preparing for is the Democrats in the House to take action on this, to at least get it through a health committee. And for then, I'm preparing for the idea that there's going to be a full vote in the state house. And then I'm preparing for the idea that the governor is going to include this in his budget again.
Which is coming at the beginning of February.
Yeah. Or sometime March, maybe? Is it soon?
I thought it was February.
Yeah.
It's February. It's February.
It's February? Okay.
It's March it's March in the year where they are inaugurated.
Well, I didn't prepare for that, I guess.
So you're preparing for the governor to talk about it in his budget address.
His budget address, yeah. And then, but what the Republican-controlled state Senate is going to do I do not know.
Pitt men's basketball is back this season with a great deal for families to enjoy Panthers game days together. The Family 4-Pack offers you 4 tickets to a game plus a $40 concessions voucher for only $125. That's like $30 a ticket, and then you get that free $40 concessions voucher to treat the entire family. The offer is available right now for the upcoming Pitt, Virginia game. That's on Monday, February 3rd at 7 p.m. at the Peterson Events Center in Oakland. My real ones know how much I love basketball, and Pitt men are killing it right now, y'all. They are near the top of the ACC standings with a fantastic record, and they're playing especially well at home, so you're going to get a good show. Don't miss out on seeing your Pitt Panthers in action this season with the Family 4-Pack deal. Family 4-Packs for the Pitt, Virginia game are on sale now at pittsburghpanthers.com/family4pack. That's family number 4-pack.
Ready to conquer your next big challenge? Make 2025 your medal year by signing up for the Dick's Sporting Goods Pittsburgh Marathon weekend of events. Happening May 3rd and 4th in Pittsburgh, it's more than a marathon. Choose from a marathon, relay, 5K, and more. And if you prefer walking, join the popular half-marathon walking division. The Pittsburgh Marathon isn't just about running. It's about community, celebration, and pushing yourself to new limits. Over 300,000 fans will be cheering you on through the streets of the Steel City. And the hardest step is the first one, signing up. A registration today is a commitment to your future self. Join the excitement by visiting thepittsburghmarathon.com. Use CityCast15 to save 15% off any event registration. That's thepittsburghmarathon.com. And again, use that code CityCast15 for 15% off any event.
Today's show is sponsored by the Frick Pittsburgh Museum and Gardens and a new award-winning tour of their historic home, Clayton. It's called Gilded, Not Golden, and this is unlike any tour you might have taken there in the past because it really gets into the complexities of Henry Clay Frick's story and legacy, like his role in the Homestead Riot and his lasting impact on our environmental health. It all focuses on the year 1892, when the riot happened, when Frick was almost assassinated, and when he mourned the loss of 2 of his children. I got to go on the new tour recently, and I was surprised by the way it started. You step into that glorious entryway and hear music from the orchestrion, that giant machine that sounds like an entire orchestra. It sets a very grand vibe. But as the music played, our tour facilitator told us how this one item was worth years of wages for a steelworker. And it became clear this tour wouldn't shy away from topics like wealth inequality and labor struggles. History is complicated, and that's what the Frick wants to share with you. The Frick's new signature tour of Clayton, Gilded, Not Golden, is now open for the season. Get tour tickets and learn more at thefrickpittsburgh.org.
So recreational cannabis, still not legal, but medical cannabis is. And I want to talk about that for a second because, Ed, you have been looking into some interesting issues about how medical cannabis is getting prescribed here in the state. So first off, right now, how does someone qualify for a medical card and who signs off on that?
So you need one of, I think it's like 24 general conditions right now. The big ones are anxiety disorders and chronic pain, and PTSD is on there too, but it's not as common. But there's a set list of conditions. Not everybody qualifies just in terms of their health. You need approval from a doctor. So either someone with an MD degree or a DO degree, and they need to certify that you have one of these conditions. Once they certify that, then you don't get like a traditional prescription. You get approval to go to a cannabis dispensary and buy the products that you want to buy. Doctors can limit the form of marijuana on these certifications. In my experience, I haven't heard that being very common.
You mean like the way you ingest it?
The way you ingest it or any other sort of limitations they want to say. But in general, it's just they approve the card, you go to a dispensary to buy the cannabis.
And you've been doing several investigations on this and found that like over the course of a year, for example, almost a third of all medical cards here in PA were prescribed by just a handful of doctors. Why do you think that that's a thing that we should be wary of?
I think what we've heard from, a bunch of different experts, including some medical marijuana doctors, is the concern is when it comes to doctors approving what kind of quality of a service are you providing when you're approving a certain number of patients a day?
Yeah.
We talked to one medical marijuana doctor who talked about how if you can't access your medical marijuana doctor after an appointment, that can create complications for you if, say, you need the doctor's written approval to continue with marijuana use while under court supervision, for instance. I think we've also heard of these issues just in terms of job stuff that comes up if they want some sort of documentation, that not having that direct access to your doctor, which can be an issue if you go through a third-party certification company, which I can talk more about. But if you don't have like the continuum of care, if you're not actually like having an ongoing relationship with the doctor, then it just creates sort of problems. And those problems can mean that you can't use cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, in isolation, I can see how, like, especially like for job stuff and, legal stuff, of course, this is going to come up. I can also see how for like some users, it can be nice to just be able to tap into some kind of medical system and not have to talk to a doctor all that much. Like, in other states, you just walk into a store, and I think it seems like that's kind of the system that's de facto been created behind the scenes in some places.
I think, that's another concern too. I mean, one aspect of it is trying to focus on the patient experience. Is like, what is the value that they get for these appointments? And maybe in Pennsylvania, that value is that they're getting certain protections, legal protections, or at least they feel like they're getting certain legal protections from using cannabis, and they can have access to the cannabis. I think one criticism we've heard from a doctor after the story ran was just that the idea that this is de facto legalization that comes at a a price for the consumer and then lucrative benefits for people who are offering these services.
I mean, actually, does that impact the price? Like the going rate of what you might acquire in one of our neighboring states, say Ohio or New Jersey or something like that, versus what we have to pay once you factor in like medical costs and going to your doctor and all this extra stuff?
Yeah, I guess the point is just like the $100 or $200 that you're paying for a card every year, and whether that's like a burden that you should have to, should be required of you. And, even more in the realm of like patient rights and everything like that is, there have been supporters of the medical marijuana program, patients who say having to go back every year to get a certification is pointless for someone with a chronic condition because that condition's not going away, and to make them have to jump through that hoop, that there should be, looser rules about that. And there was a genuine push to loosen those rules from members of the state's medical marijuana advisory board. They didn't get very far. There was a push in legislation, but right now that requirement is through regulation. Like the state medical marijuana law doesn't actually say you need approval every year. That's happened through regulation.
Oh, I definitely thought that was like part of the OG plan.
In talking to people, it's my understanding is the card renewal is part of the original legislation, if I'm correct.
One of the things I thought was the most interesting about some of your reporting, Ed, is like you also talked about like what happens if one of these doctors gets in trouble, like if they've been, found liable in some way of medical misconduct, that doesn't disqualify them from participating in these prescription programs.
Yeah. And so, what we found was, under the Wolf administration, nobody was turned away because of prior discipline. Once their license was in good standing, they were allowed into the program. Under the Shapiro administration, it was still relatively rare, but there were some doctors who were being turned away because of prior discipline. And that really opened up questions about what is fair. If someone has a license in good standing, should they be allowed to be in the medical marijuana program, or should they be subject to extra scrutiny?
I mean, patients have to get recertified to doctors?
No, doctors don't have to. Or as long as your license is in good standing, like your license gets checked on and everything like that. There's a whole system, but there's not like you don't have to reapply to join the registry. I think one of the criticisms we've heard too is that there's a 4-hour training requirement to join the medical marijuana practitioner registry, but there's no additional training requirements after the fact.
I'm not surprised to hear that regulation is like part of what's complicating Pennsylvania's system. But I guess it bears the question, like, is it possible that additional regulation could solve some of these issues?
So there are two buckets I'd put in. One is that they have less regulation would help, but there's also more regulation. So I'll talk about more regulation real quick. They could subject physicians to a probationary period. They could subject physicians to certain limits on how many patients they can approve for the program. I talked to Patrick Nightingale, medical marijuana cannabis advocate. He's in the Pittsburgh area. I mean, he was in favor of clearer rules about who's allowed in and who's not allowed in. And so he was generally had good things to say about this type of proposal, even though he's, much more on the pro marijuana side. I think there's a case that clearer rules for everybody could be good. I mean, there's the other aspect of just loosening some restrictions. Right now, doctors can't advertise their services as someone who can approve a medical marijuana card, but there are third-party companies who can. I mean, there are people who have concerns about marijuana and its expansion who don't think that's a fair system or a fair setup, and that it creates these middlemen who people have to pay a fee to.
Well, and I think everything Ed is saying is part of why, it's so hard to think of how to legalize it recreationally. Everything Ed is looking at is from a 8-year-old law that, Ed is still digging through the implications of. And as he mentioned, there are lawmakers who are pointing his reporting saying we should tighten this up. And then, there are people in the legislature trying to have this conversation about, expand even further. And sometimes these fault lines even play into really big issues for cannabis consumers. For instance, an industry-backed bill wants to let there be home grow of marijuana for your own consumption if you're an existing medical patient, or, if you're a future medical patient, but they don't want to let recreational people do that. And, for consumer advocates who just are, have looked at legalization bills across the country, that's a big deal. They think home grow should be part of any bill for anybody. If you're going to legalize it, why is it legal for a big corporation to grow it to sell to everyone, or someone who just has this one license to grow it, a couple plants for themselves because apparently a doctor says that they have a condition. But if I want to just smoke my own reefer that I grow on a windowsill, that's not okay. Like, these are all of the fault lines that have to be figured out in a bill. And, these are complicated issues from a lot of people who I think sometimes don't realize how big an issue this can be.
I hear you when you say it's hard to imagine how we legalize and undo 8 years of regulations like this, but also wouldn't most of these problems be solved if we just went ahead and legalized?
I think that the big thing is once you legalize, you do see medical marijuana programs drop.
But is that a bad thing? I mean, wouldn't that open the field for as you say, the folks who want access to this, but maybe the medical system was never where they were supposed to be?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to your point, whether you would see a significant impact on the medical side. You'd see a much smaller medical program, presumably, if it followed the pattern of other states. And so whether this medical program was a bridge to full legalization, I think some people could see it that way.
I think that I brought that up not as an argument for or against recreational. I'm just this is complicated, and I think it's one of those issues that seems not that complicated for people who are just let me smoke up this drug that's available in most of our neighboring states that a lot of states have said is totally fine, that the federal government's constantly going back and forth about what they're going to do. People campaign on legalizing it. It's an issue that's really permeated our culture especially for the last 20 years or so. Mm-hmm. But Pennsylvania, it's just already, I would say our legislature is kind of slow moving. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of layer it on top of, I think we still have a lot of social conservatives, divided legislature, competing political interests. This is a big industry. They spend a lot of money on lobbying. They spend a lot of money on campaign contributions. It all gets really complicated really, really, really quickly. This is not a defense. It's just an explanation.
Yeah. I mean, I guess as you're taking kind of the sum of all these things, do you think that it's still worth, our state considering decriminalization? If we can't do full legalization this year, next year, some year at some point, then is decriminalization still on the table?
Some advocates say that should be just the starting point. Decriminalize it, make sure that nobody's being, thrown into the criminal justice system.
For possessing small amounts. They're not trying to move kilos of the product or something.
Yeah, that is an argument that some folks have made. Chris Goldstein, an advocate from Philly, has made this point to me. And I do think, I'm not super familiar with all the numbers, but I do believe there is a decent case to be made that Pennsylvania prosecutors do go a little bit more after possession than other neighboring states. But all of that to say is then, though, I brought that case up with Dan Laughlin, an Erie Republican who's championed legalization in the state Senate. And he's well, if you do that, you're going to kind of cut the legs out from the legalization push. You kind of need that pressure of the people who are stop arresting us to get a legalization bill through. So, I would say from a harm reduction standpoint, it would make sense. But the General Assembly is not a harm reduction focused body.
I mean, God help me. I really want my legislature to do what the people want and would be best for the populace, not just what's politically advantageous.
I would say that, this is the lifelong endeavor of many people who put their lives into Pennsylvania government is to try and do that. And I don't know, Megan, are you thinking about a run for office or something?
No. I'm very happy in my sandbox. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big question is whether the House Democrats, I'd imagine that they're the ones driving what's going to be considered, because they would have the power to set the negotiating table, whether that would go with how far that would go. But they seem to be the ones that if there's going to be action, they're the ones who would be likely to take it.
Yeah, it is right. And let's go back to the state's medical marijuana bill. They forced it through the Senate, which was a bit friendlier to it at the time, dumped a version in the House that the Senate could live with. And then the House just figured out its housey things, where they passed it over the tiers of then House Speaker Mike Turzai. And that's how we got medical marijuana in Pennsylvania. I think folks are kind of looking at recreational just strategically, the legislative strategy, folks are looking at it reverse. The House just has to come to what it can come to terms with, get it to the Senate. The Senate will then, take that, make its changes, get it back to the House, and the House gives its final approval. So just, you kind of have to just start the ball somewhere. And I think folks are looking to the House Democrats.
Well, no matter what happens or doesn't, I know both of you are going to have a handle on it. Ed, Stephen, thank you so much. We'll have links to both your work in our show notes.
Thank you. It was a blast.
Thank you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. Check out our show notes for links to Ed and Steven's amazing work for Spotlight PA. And don't sleep on our Hey Pittsburgh newsletter. There's lots of goodness in there, too. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Talk to y'all soon.
The Steelers are the greatest dynasty of all time, according to my son did a project about this last year.
What?
He entered a Pennsylvania statistics competition. I think that was his conclusion, that he looked at Steelers, Patriots, Cowboys, and I think maybe somebody else. But yeah, I think the takeaway was the Steelers were, according to his measurements, the best dynasty.
I love that your Pennsylvania child is making you pay attention to Steelers football. That's incredible. Is your family, are you football fans?
They've turned me into more of a football fan these past few years, to be honest. So we enjoy the stats and the talking about it probably more than even the game watching. So,
well, who is your team then? You better not say Baltimore. I still haven't recovered from that playoff game.
Well, we're in York, so we're like Ravens country, so we're very happy about that game.
But do you have a team?
Eagles are my true team. So,
I mean, at least it's in the Commonwealth.